Okay, it says I'm live, and I'm going to choose to believe it, at least until I hear otherwise. If you can hear me, give me a shout. Want to make sure that chat is turned on. Whoop. Okay, Dan says I'm up. Okay, good. Thank you for joining us tonight, folks. As you can tell, I'm back in Jerusalem after a week away. It was a whirlwind trip. Had to run home to Panama and then run to Texas and then fly to Jordan and then drive to Petra and then go to Aqaba last night and then cross the border from Aqaba into Eilat and pick up another rental car and drive back up to Jerusalem. So it's been a whirlwind couple of days. And we've got some big news for you here. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to get right to it, and then I will probably come back around to it as we get more people joining us, because we're going to have obviously a lot of people wanting to hear this news about the hostages. So we have some good news about the hostages potentially coming out this evening. Pretty much everybody in the government in Israel is going to meet tonight on the topic of the hostages. They are very, very close to a deal to release some number of the hostages. I'm going to get into the details here in a second. And so that while they haven't finalized everything and announced it, it's likely that in about 2 hours or 3 hours from now, we will know exactly what the deal is supposed to be for. Now, first of all, this deal comes with the condition that there will be a pause in the fighting. The IDF has obviously been putting a tremendous amount of pressure on Hamas in Gaza, and that pressure has led to Hamas being willing to come to the table and being willing to give up some of the hostages. Now, there's some very interesting things in these details that tell us some facts about, or at least we can infer some things about where Hamas is with all of these things. How many of them are dead? How many of them are alive? Where are they? Do they even know where they are? We're about to find out because here's what we know so far. And I'm taking this off of Amir Safari, however you say his last name. I'm taking this off of his Telegram channel. He made a very good post sort of detailing all these things. And this is what the cabinet, the government, the Security Council, the War Council, all the councils here in Israel are meeting about right now as we speak. So, point number one, 50 living Israelis will be released in batches of 12 to 13 each day for a 4-day possible ceasefire. Each day of the 4 days of the agreed upon ceasefire, 12 to 13 hostages each day. And get this, they must be Israelis. Now, they may release others that are not Israelis on top of that, but they have to be Israelis, at least 50 Israelis, according to these terms that they're putting out. So there may be other nationalities released, but not at the expense of the 50 Israelis. During the 4 days of the ceasefire, point number two, Hamas will try to locate more of the kidnapped hostages. And they estimate that they can locate up to 80 women and children. Well, wait a minute. That tells us Hamas doesn't even necessarily know where all of the hostages are. And so they don't, so if you had to ask Hamas how many of the hostages are still alive, they couldn't tell you because they don't even know where they are. They've spread them out all over the place. Some of them we know have been killed because they've found a few bodies. But there are still more than 200 and something like 240 of these hostages that are apparently being held by Hamas, but they don't even know where or how many of them are still alive. So they're estimating that they can find 80 women and children in that group. And what we've been told before is that these people that will be released will only be women and children, not military-age males or soldiers. So I guess you could infer from that from point number one, at least 50 of them will be Israelis, but they might release some others on top of that, that they may release up to 80 hostages. Now, here's how that goes. Now, point number three, an additional day of respite will be given to for every additional 10 that are released. So basically what they're talking about is releasing 10 hostages a day for 12 hostages a day for 4 days, and then 10 hostages a day after that. And it seems like up to about 80, because that would be the women and children that they're holding, that they can find. And again, they may not actually be able to find all these people. So number four, he said kidnappers, but the people who are kidnapped that are not in Hamas hands will also be released, and Hamas is responsible for going and getting them from whoever has them and releasing them. So what that's telling us is it's not just Hamas that's holding these hostages. There are people from most likely the PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who are holding hostages as well. So it was not just a Hamas operation on October the 7th. There were, we already know, thousands of people who came across, some were even just civilians, just came across into Israel to loot and steal things. And some of them may have been PIJ fighters who grabbed people and took them back. So it's up to Hamas to find them and get them back and have them released. And that's point number four of this, the stipulations of this agreement. Point number five, murderers will not be released from Israeli prisons. So part of the deal that has been talked about already is that for every hostage released by Hamas, there would be a corresponding number of hostages, Palestinian hostages, not hostages, prisoners, that Israel is holding in prisons here for ostensibly for committing crimes that will be released back into Gaza. And Israel is saying, we will release certain prisoners that we have, but none of them will be murderers. Anybody who has murdered an Israeli will not be released. Now, I've also been reading that Israel has up to 300 Hamas fighters that they've captured on or since October 7th that are still alive. Many of them were wounded, were treated in Israeli hospitals, and are in Israeli prisons. Those guys are not getting released. But they've been interrogating those guys, and they've actually been getting a lot of information from them. They say, at least the article I read, said that these Hamas fighters were, many of them were singing like canaries and telling lots and lots of secrets about what is going on with Hamas. And I believe that because what you'll find in many cases, what we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, is again, the strong horse theory. They want to be on the winning team. Arabs are just like that. Arabs want to be on the winning team, and they don't have any problem switching sides if they feel like the other side is winning. And especially if it's, you know, that or life in prison or maybe even getting executed for your crimes. You know, these guys are likely, and not only that, but think about it. It's a lot like, say, the gangs that you see in inner cities of the United States. A lot of these kids, they just join gangs because they don't have anything else to do. They're surrounded by it. They are completely immersed in the gang culture, and it's just what you do where they live. They don't have a dad to keep them out of it and to slap some sense into them, so they join gangs because that's what you do. Well, it's very likely that a lot of these fighters that were captured are guys that are telling, at least, you know, under interrogation, they're saying, look, I didn't want to join Hamas, but they didn't give me much of a choice, and there wasn't anything else to do, so I joined Hamas. So I'm very happy to not be part of Hamas, especially now that Hamas is getting their heads handed to them in Gaza. You know, I'd like to keep my head on my shoulders for a while, and so I'll tell you what you want to know. Well, I imagine that is part of the case, okay? All right, let's move on. I'm going to get a drink here, just a second. I've got a wonderful, wonderful wife here with me now who is taking good care of me with tea to keep my voice going as I do all this. So praise God for her. So point number 5, murderers will not be released. Point number 6, the population of Gaza will not be allowed to return to the northern half of the Gaza Strip. Okay, that's big news. That is a big development. Did you hear what I just said? Israel is saying they will not allow Palestinians to return to the northern part of the Gaza Strip for the indefinite future. And they're saying that they're going to go into the southern part. They're going to have to. We've been saying that all along. And I've been mentioning that Israel really hadn't released its plan for how to go in and eradicate Hamas from the southern part of the Gaza Strip. And especially with a couple million Palestinians in there that can't leave. How do you shuffle them around and kill Hamas without getting these civilians in the way? And suffice it to say, it's going to get much harder to do that, obviously, when they go into the south. But they released their plan over the last 24 hours for how they're planning to do that. And basically, they're just going to designate safe zones around the southern part of Gaza. And they're going to tell everybody, okay, go over there now. We're going to kill everybody in this sector. And they're going to move everybody out of the way. They're going to go in and dismantle whatever Hamas infrastructure they can find. And then they're going to say, okay, that area is clear. Now everybody move back over here. We're going to go over there, and we're going to dismantle the Hamas infrastructure over there. That is going to be astoundingly difficult to do. Moving that many people who don't want to be moved, who are not happy about what's going on there, and you know, trying to do that and figure out who the bad guys are, you're asking for an absolute hornet's nest. It's like trying to say, we're gonna go into this hornet's nest and we're gonna pick out just the queen from the hornet's nest and leave all the rest of the hornets. Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, they don't have a lot of other choices because what else are you gonna do with these people? Nobody else wants them. So they're going to have to try to move them around, and they have to go into the south. But the fact that they are putting it into the stipulations of this agreement that Gazans will not be allowed to go back to the north is pretty eye-opening. It's eye-popping. I mean, astounding, amazing. Okay, so that's point number 6. Point number 7, fuel will enter the Gaza Strip, but only during the days of the ceasefire. So they will allow fuel to go in. Now, they have allowed some fuel to go in already. They've actually brought it in themselves for the hospitals. But apparently they're going to allow fuel without actually like tightly controlling where it goes to flow into the strip. That is probably a compromise, I would say. There is a faction here in Israel that really does not want to allow fuel into the Gaza Strip because they know it's going to prolong the war. I mean, you understand, the longer this goes on, Israel's got its whole country mobilized for this thing. There's stores shut down all over the place. People can't go to work. There's factories that are closed, and there's agriculture that's rotting in the fields because there's nobody out there to harvest it. And so every day that this goes on is a loss for Israel. They want to get this over with as quickly as possible, and allowing fuel into Gaza absolutely will prolong this fight. It'll reinvigorate Hamas, allow them to run the air pumps that let them stay down in their tunnels, and it'll take some of the pressure off of them, and very likely it will prolong this fight. So that has to be, in my opinion, a compromise that was, they're like, okay, that was something that they demanded, and all right, fine. And understand, this is going through Qatar, right? They're not speaking, it's not like you got Israeli representatives sitting down with Hamas representatives. I don't see that happening. There's Israeli representatives talking to Qatari representatives, probably with an American in the room, if I had to guess. The Americans are definitely having something to do with this and pushing very hard for this and putting a lot of pressure, not on Hamas. The Biden administration is putting a lot of pressure on Israel to make this happen. Hey, thank you very much for the $20 there. That's very kind of you. So that I think is not a cave, but it's a compromise. Now, here's another one that's very interesting. Well, let's get number 8. Fighting will resume immediately upon the end of the truce. Well, that's what the end of the truce means. That's just, defining the term, I guess, because ending a truce means the fighting starts up again. Okay, that's not a surprise. Number 9 is a surprise. Collecting intelligence from the air will be suspended for 6 hours each day. What? Wait, what? Israel is agreeing to suspend intelligence collection from the air. I'm not sure I even believe that. That is probably the most astounding piece of this entire agreement. The fact that they're saying, we're going to stop looking for 6 hours every day and let you do whatever you want down there. I just can't see that happening. It could be that they are suspending aerial reconnaissance, but they have satellite reconnaissance, something like that. I mean, you can't, nobody's going to be able to tell if they suspend satellite reconnaissance. You can hear the drone overhead, but you can't hear the satellite, right? So that is astounding to me. It doesn't make any sense, but it obviously was something that Hamas was insisting on because there's no way the Israelis would have volunteered that one. I promise you that. So number 10, this is just information. All of the security branches, the IDF, Shin Bet, and Mossad supported the deal. The War Cabinet unanimously supports the deal, and they are meeting tonight, almost as we speak, to ratify the deal, I guess. Israel insisted for the last 2 weeks that they would not accept the original proposal that Hamas put forward. And that's because the original proposal that Hamas put forward was ridiculous on its face. It was like, well, Israel has to give back all of the 19,000 prisoners that, I mean, it was just ridiculous. But, basically Israel has to cease to exist and then we'll give back the hostages. Like, it didn't make any sense. The original things that Hamas was asking for, it was like a 10-point plan, and it was just absolutely a non-starter. It wasn't going to happen. So that's not a surprise at all. After the deal is approved by the government, 24 hours, so that's probably tonight, when the deal gets approved by the government. 24 hours will be given to petitions against it. After that, it will be launched. So I guess they're going to allow people to bring arguments about why they shouldn't do this, and then it's going to go ahead. Now, I'll tell you, they recently had a giant march from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to, I think it was to the offices of the Israeli government here, the Knesset, which is about 60 miles. I mean, it's a long, they walked a long way, of families and supporters of a hostage deal like this, of a ceasefire, temporary halt in the operations in exchange for some of the hostages back. Obviously, getting the hostages back is the most important thing on everybody's minds. And that's why all along the Israeli government and the IDF have been saying, yeah, Hamas can get a ceasefire anytime they want it. They just have to release the hostages. So Hamas is like, okay, we'll release hostages, but we'll release them in small groups for each day that you stop shooting at us. There, again, I'm going to go back and repeat a little bit. There's no way that this would have come to fruition if it had not been for the pressure of the invasion really dismantling Hamas from the ground up, starting in the north and working their way south. Now, that being said, Hamas is still fighting. I just showing, you know, I always show you this app here that's got the launches from today. There were some fairly sizable launches at Tel Aviv, and this is all coming out of Gaza. The majority of the launches I saw today, however, were from the north, from Hezbollah. Now, Israel has been winning that fight in any measure. Hezbollah has been ramping up their attacks from the north, but every time they do, Israel just hammers them up there, and they've killed probably over 100 Hezbollah fighters at this point that they know of, and probably more that they don't know of. And they hit a bunch of Hezbollah positions again today. So Hezbollah is taking outsized losses for the gains that they're making, which are really, really small in the north. The majority of the rockets and mortars and missiles and things that they're firing from the north or from Lebanon are falling in unpopulated areas, or they're being shot down by the Iron Dome system. And usually right after they fire them, the team that fired them gets smoked by a drone or a fighter jet or artillery or a tank or something on the Israeli side. So they are trying their best, Hezbollah is trying their best to put pressure on the Israelis from the north, but the Israelis are handily dealing with the threat from Hezbollah up there. And while there are still more than 60,000 people that have been displaced from the northern border, and they're not making progress in terms of stopping the rocket attacks coming across, so far they have not been overwhelmed by them. There have been some that landed in, built up areas. I was up there when one landed in Kiryat Shimona, and right in downtown. But they're not really materially affecting the outcome of this conflict in the south. They're just trying to show some support. Now, they're most likely, the Hezbollah is most likely under a tremendous amount of pressure from from Iran to step up the attacks. And we see that, I believe that, because we're seeing all of the proxies that Iran supports pushing to try to ramp up the pressure on Israel. Yemen is desperately trying to be relevant in this fight. And I have to make a correction. Yesterday, I was talking about the fact that Yemen took over a ship, a cargo ship, I believe out in the Red Sea, because it said it was an Israeli ship. And I said it was probably an Israeli flagged ship, but it was not an Israeli ship. As it turns out, it's not even an Israeli flagship. And many of you, thank you for correcting me on that. It's a Bahamian flagged ship. It didn't have any Israelis on the ship. It may be owned in some small part by an Israeli or two, but I mean, it'd be like saying we're going to take over Citibank because they have some shareholders that are Israeli. I mean, you know, it's just kind of ridiculous. And Yemen is holding these poor, you know, Bangladeshis and, you know, sailors that have nothing to do with this conflict. They're holding this cargo ship that has nothing to do with this conflict and just making up some reason to hold it so that they can say that they're striking a blow against Israel. And Israel's like, what? Like, yeah, we don't really care. Israel said, look, this is a shame. This is, you know, dumb. You shouldn't be doing this. But I can't see Israel launching an all-out attack on Yemen because they took a cargo ship that really has very, very sketchy ties to Israel in any way, shape, or form. So Yemen is also, you know, they've been firing drones and rockets and missiles and stuff at Israel. As far as I know, none of the ones that they have fired have actually struck Israel. One of them struck Egypt, and one drone which struck Eilat, struck a school in Eilat. Yemen took credit for it, but when they did an investigation, the Israelis found out it was actually fired by like a militia in Iraq. And so Yemen wants so badly to say that they're hurting Israel. They're even taking credit for explosions that they didn't cause in Israel. It's just absolutely comical. Those guys down there they're a goat rodeo in Yemen. I mean, it's like, come on, guys, just give it up already, right? Israel is like, we don't even need to respond to those guys. They're just like a little annoying mosquito, like, go away. The United States, though, has been continuing to receive attacks on our bases in Iraq and Syria. Today we had a base, an al-Assad base, which is kind of in the central part of Iraq. It was struck and 10 U.S. troops were wounded in that attack. And now we'll see what kind of response we get. The response has been really, in my opinion, very lackluster from the United States. They bluster, and, you know, Lloyd Austin stands up there and says, don't do it again. You better not do it. And then, you know, we blow up an empty warehouse or something. We have not gone hard against the IGRC. I'm sorry, the IRGC. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps they did snap military drills today and yesterday that were apparently unplanned, which is perhaps some sort of an attempt at a show of force. But they don't have an expeditionary army. Their army is not going to go marching into Israel across Iraq or something like that. Just, they don't have the capability to do that. They have a very large army. They have the largest army in the region, over 500,000 people. The Iranian army is actually larger than the United States Army when it comes in terms of active duty troops by a small amount, but they're relatively poorly equipped, poorly trained, poorly motivated, poorly paid, and poorly led, and lots of corruption over there. So, you know, the size of their military is really not much of a factor when it comes to the threat that they pose. And they sort of understand, I believe, Iran understands that getting directly involved in this war would be far too costly for them and their economy. And so they're not going to do that, but they are putting pressure on their proxies in the region, which is Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen, they're putting pressure on all those guys to ramp up the attacks and try to, really take it to Israel. And so far, Israel is handling it with aplomb, I would say. So let's go back over these because I went through these kind of slowly. I'm going to go back through this list again rather quickly of what we know about the hostage deal that is likely to be announced later on tonight. The time right now is 7:30 p.m. here in Jerusalem, and the War Cabinet, the government, almost the whole government, everybody is meeting to try to ratify this deal tonight, okay? And here's what we know. Number one, 50 living Israelis will be released in groups of 12 or 13 per day for the 4 days of the agreed upon ceasefire, okay? I'm saying ceasefire. You could call it a humanitarian pause or a tactical pause or whatever you want. The upshot of it is the same. They're going to stop fighting. There's more I want to explain about that in a second, but I want to get through this whole list very quickly. Number two, during the ceasefire, Hamas will try to locate more of the hostages, and they estimate they can find up to 80 women and children, which means they don't even know where they all are, and they're hoping they can find them all. An additional day of respite, day of not fighting, will be granted for every additional 10 hostages that are released. And so it sounds like we could get as many as 80 of them out. That sounds like the top end of this at this point. And they're not going to be men, soldiers, military-age males, anything like that. They're going to be women and children. And they're going to have to be 50 Israelis at least. And then if they want to release people from other nationalities, they can, but and they'll get credit for those. But there has to be at least 50 Israelis. The kidnappers, the hostages not in Hamas hands will also be released, but Hamas is responsible for finding them and releasing them, which means that they're also being held by PIJ and other organizations, perhaps. There will be a equal-ish number of prisoners released from Israeli jails and returned to Gaza, but not murderers. They won't release people who have murdered any Israelis. The population of Gaza will not be allowed to return to the north part of the Gaza Strip for the indefinite future. That is a big deal. It means they're going to have to try to move them around when they go into the south, and that's going to be tough. Fuel will be allowed to enter the Gaza Strip, but only during the days of, as long as the ceasefire holds. So if the ceasefire only goes 4 days, they only get fuel for 4 days. If they want it to go longer than that, they're going to have to keep releasing hostages. And collecting intelligence, this is the one that blows my mind. Well, fighting will resume immediately upon the end of the truce. That's what it means when a truce ends. Collecting intelligence from the air will be suspended for 6 hours a day during the truce. What? I'm still just shocked by that one. And all of the security branches, IDF, Shin Bet, and Mossad, and the War Cabinet unanimously support this deal. Israel insisted for 2 weeks that they wouldn't accept the original 10-point plan that was put forward by Hamas because it was ridiculous. And after the deal is approved by the government, which should hopefully be tonight, there's going to be a 24-hour grace period where they will allow anybody, basically speak now or forever hold your peace. If you have some reason to oppose it, come forward now before it goes into effect. So those are the 10 points of the deal. Now, I wanted to answer some questions that some viewers have asked. Very good questions, specifically relate to this. Okay, and this has to do with how the IDF is operating inside Gaza right now. Okay, the question is, how does the IDF operate in Gaza? Are they going in for a couple hours at a time, Do the soldiers go home after a certain time? Where do they sleep, etc.? So, no, this is how this works. Once the invasion started, at first, they were doing raids into Gaza and then coming back out at night because they couldn't hold a secure perimeter inside Gaza. Once the actual invasion started, they went into Gaza and they have stayed there. Now, I've been a soldier. I was a soldier a long time ago. I was an infantryman. I can tell you it is miserable because what happens is when the end of the mission comes, mission day, you snatch a few hours of sleep and then you're right back at it on another mission. We are typically in the United States military, we are gathering intelligence from every mission that we do. So every time you knock over an objective, you're getting what they call SSI, sensitive site intelligence, off of that objective, which is cell phones, computers, written materials, anything you can find that will give you clues as to what the enemy is doing or where he is or what he's planning. And that gets processed through the intel branch, and then that gives you your marching orders for your next mission. Sometimes the operational tempo goes so fast that you're doing multiple missions every day, which means train up, prepare, go, hit the thing, do the SSI, and try to get a little bit of rest, clean up, rearm, refit, go right back out, do it again, do it again, do it again. These guys are pushing hard into Gaza. And again, like I've said over and over, this kind of combat is the most stressful, dangerous kind of combat there is. Urban combat is very, very hard and very, very dangerous. So we need to be praying for these guys for sure. But when night comes, they're probably out doing missions at night, but let's say that they rotate and they've got some downtime. They are staying either in their tracks or under their tracks or in a shelter or something like that. And what they do is they secure a perimeter, and then when I was in, we just lay down on the ground. It's not like you have a tent. It's not like you have a sleeping bag. You just lay down on the ground and you just try to get some sleep. It is miserable, miserable stuff. These guys are sleeping obviously in a hole or in a armored vehicle, trying to stay warm and trying to stay safe in case a missile or a mortar or a grenade or something comes in. And so, you're sleeping in the mud when it rains. You're sleeping in the dust when it's dry. You're eating just whenever you get a chance. And they are rotating people out of there, especially among the special operations guys who have the highest operational tempo, because they will get burned out very, very quickly. And they have the benefit of home being literally right here. So Israel's so small, they can let those guys go home and they will, just say, hey, take 24, 48 hours off and then come right back to it. And they don't have to put them on it's not like Afghanistan where you'd have to put them on an airplane and fly them all the way back to the States or anything like that. They just get in a car and in a couple hours they're back with their families. And so my friend Duran Kedar got some time off in the last week and was able to go home, see his family, and then go right back to the war. That is pretty rare. I mean, normally the war is not right there like that, but that is what those guys are doing. So when they go in, they are staying in there, and they are eating and sleeping and everything inside there. Dan Crutchfield sends a message, a couple questions. What's the feeling on the ground in Israel about this deal? Are Israelis happy or mad? The answer is yes. Israelis are happy and mad. And that's a uniquely Israeli trait that I've learned since I've been here. Obviously, the Israelis desperately want their hostages back, and especially those who have loved ones that are being held hostage. So those people have been marching on the government, holding vigils, holding protests, and demanding that they acquiesce to a ceasefire of some sort in exchange for some of the hostages, because they don't care about anything else. They just want to get the hostages back. The rest of the country is, and many people in the country are saying, yes, but we want the hostages back, but not at the expense of strengthening Hamas's position, not at the expense of, justifying Hamas or giving Hamas a respite, taking the pressure off of them in a way that's going to prolong the suffering for everybody. So I've been saying this since day one, that the minute you take your foot off the gas in Gaza, you give Hamas the chance to rearm, refit, regroup, rest, get some sleep, and come back and fight you some more. So in the long run, every day of respite is going to prolong this ultimate fight that much longer. And it might sound cold, it might sound callous, it might sound cruel, but that is the reality of war. And so my question is, what do you think? What would you do? And give me in the comments, because I like to go through and read the comments after this is over and just see what you guys are thinking about this. Tell me what you would do if you were the president of Israel and it was up to you to decide, do I give Hamas a 5-day break and let them rearm, refit, and rest so that they can kill more IDF soldiers and they can, prolong the misery and continue, make it that much longer, 5 days longer for the hostages that don't get released? Or do I keep my foot on the gas and run the risk of the hostages getting killed in the process, hostages not getting released, even dying in the process? And would you be willing to sacrifice some of the hostages to get this whole thing over with and wipe out Hamas sooner so that they never have to face this again? And that is a very, very hard question. Because if you have any shred of humanity, obviously you want to do what you can. If you have 50 hostages, that's a big, get right there. But man, that's a hard compromise to make when you know that it's going to end up in more dead Israeli soldiers, most likely, and even it could end up in, prolonging the misery for many of the hostages that are left. So from what I'm seeing on the comments here, it looks like most people are in agreement that we should not have a pause. And I would only say to you, I don't disagree with you on that. I don't disagree with you. But then again, neither you nor I have a loved one who is being held hostage. And so I can see the other side of the equation. I can understand if you're a family member and you have a chance of getting your little kid back, I'd be like, I don't care how long you draw it out. If you get a chance of getting my 3-year-old back, of getting my grandmother back, give them a pause. Give them a ceasefire. I can see that. But man, I would not want to be the government official that has to make that decision, because that is tough. That's really hard. Okay? So the other question he had was, does this ceasefire affect only Gaza? Does it extend to Lebanon and the West Bank? Israel is not negotiating at all with anybody in the West Bank or in Lebanon. So there's no official fighting, to be perfectly technical about it. There's no official war going on between Lebanon and Israel, because Lebanon is more than Hezbollah. There's this militant group that happens to be a political party in Lebanon that has lots and lots of rockets that they got from Israel, from Iran, that is getting pressured by Iran to do something. So they're, shooting rockets across the border every day to try to keep Israeli troops busy there so they can't go south and finish the fight against Gaza that much faster. But there is no official hostilities between Lebanon and Israel. So no, there's no talks going on. The only talks are the brinksmanship that you're seeing between Israeli leadership, who is saying publicly, knowing that Hezbollah is listening, and Hamas also has people in Lebanon, is saying, we will bomb you back to the Stone Age. So you just keep it up. We will bomb you back to the Stone Age. That's literally what they've been saying. as it relates to the West Bank. Those 2.5 million Palestinians that live here in Israel, inside Judea and Samaria, are governed by the Palestinian Authority, and there have been meetings between the Palestinian Authority and Israeli officials via Anthony Blinken, I believe. But really the Palestinian Authority, while out of one side of their mouth, they are vociferously voicing support for Hamas and their Palestinian brothers down in Gaza. On the other side, they're kind of, I think, trying to keep a lid on stuff in the West Bank, because Israel has basically said to them the same thing. If you, the Palestinian Authority, if you want to have happen to you what's happening to Hamas right now, you just let your people try to recreate October 7th in the West Bank, and we'll come in there and we'll take the Palestinian, we'll reboot the government in the Palestinian controlled areas of the West Bank. So if you want, you just keep it up. So there's not any official negotiations going on between any of those people. Now, one of the other questions was, if there's a ceasefire for a few days, would this require the IDF to retract from Gaza or remain there without shooting or moving forward? No, this would be a tactical pause in place, which means the troops would basically just stop and stay where they are, which is very dangerous and putting them at greater risk. So by agreeing to a tactical ceasefire like this, the IDF is willingly putting themselves at greater risk, because every minute that you've got your troops on the battlefield is a minute that they could get killed. And they are willingly doing that in order to get hostages out. Now, I will say this. There is a strategic or tactical reason why you would want to get to allow Hamas to release some hostages, to let them, to give them a compromise deal that will allow them to save face with their own people so that they release some of your hostages. That goes beyond the net positive of just getting your people back, right? The real tactical benefit for the IDF is that if you get 50 people out, those are 50 people that you can then, debrief once they get to safety and find out, where were you being held? What did you hear? What were they saying? What were you being fed? Were you underground? Were you above ground? What can you tell us? And so you've got 50 sources of intelligence who have been with Hamas for the last 45 days that they can pull out of there and glean some intelligence off of that could inform follow-on missions. So that's a big deal. And that is one good reason why they might agree to do this. But no, the IDF will stay in place inside Gaza for the duration of this thing. They're not going to pull out. And last week I talked about the possibility of a balloon hovering over Gaza, taking pictures every other second and then analyzing them with AI. Wouldn't Hamas shoot down the balloon if they saw it? Well, the balloon normally flies above small arms range, which is like, 400 meters. An AK-47, for example, can fire 400 or 500 meters high, so that's, 1,500 feet? So they fly this thing a couple thousand feet up where it's not within small arms range. Now, they could maybe try to shoot a rocket at it or something like that, but they can essentially do the same thing without there being a balloon to shoot at, which is a stationary target. They have drones that are flying over the battlefield that are scanning almost every square inch of that battlefield pretty much at all times, and are feeding that raw data into a massive computer that can then rewind, roll back time. So if they see something blow up, let's say, like a car bomb goes off, they can go back to roll the footage back and find out when that car was placed there, and then see who got out of the car and left it there, and then follow that person back home and see where they went, and then they can go blow up that house or send a special forces group in to kick in the door and capture that guy. So Israel is receiving a tremendous amount of information right now from signals intelligence, human intelligence, and other forms of intelligence that they have in the Gaza Strip and elsewhere. They have, like I said, over 300 Hamas fighters that have been captured that are being interrogated. And many of those guys are giving up information that is assisting the IDF in targeting where they need to go next and giving them objectives. But that process is a very complex process. And it's something that the IDF has had to do from a standing start, starting October 7th. Very difficult to do. And so, yeah, it's been a crazy, crazy month and a half for the IDF. Okay, we got a few minutes left. I'm gonna spend about 10 more minutes if you have questions. Crutch, we got any more questions there? Let's see. So we did a complete poll with 336 votes. Should Israel support a ceasefire in exchange for living hostages? 69% of you said no, and 30% of you said yes. That's about what I see here. So, and yes, the ceasefire will only affect Gaza. Okay, somebody says Iran can shoot 100,000 rockets at one time. No, they can't. People have said Hezbollah could do that, but they can't. Hezbollah has maybe 100,000 rockets or 150,000 rockets. It would be very hard for them to fire them all at one time because they don't have that many people, and you have to have people to fire the rockets. And if you're going to set up 100,000 rockets, you can bet that the IDF would notice, would see 100,000 rockets being set up on the Lebanese side of the border and would bomb those things, like I say, back to the Stone Age. So they might be able to fire a lot of rockets, but they're not going to fire 100,000 all at once. On that note, the Hamas has fired more than 3,000 rockets in the last like 30 days. I'm sorry. Yeah, in the last like 30 days alone. Hamas is still firing rockets to this day, but it is declining. And I keep saying this, and I'll say it again. We will know that the end is in sight when we have a day that goes by without a single rocket coming out of the Gaza Strip into Israel. And that day is coming. I believe it. I believe that day is coming. Is there an Israeli presence on the Rafah border or other aid crossings? Yes, there is an Israeli presence down there of some sort. I'm not exactly sure because I haven't been down there, but there is also actually a crossing between Israel and Gaza that I'm told has been allowed to take aid into Gaza, medical supplies and food and stuff like that. That's right down by the Egyptian border. That's all I know about that. I also know that the Israelis have been pumping like hundreds of thousands of liters of fresh, clean water into Gaza. I wanted to mention, thank you for all the super chats and super thanks. We use every one of those contributions to the best of our abilities to bring you more of this kind of news and really give you the best news we possibly can. We're keeping a team here over Thanksgiving here in Israel. I'm going to be here over Thanksgiving with my wife and my daughter, bringing you the news, and we are kept here by your donations. So thank you very much. I would suggest if you want to donate, go to cbn.com and donate over there. And if you want to watch the...
Thank you so much for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Israeli Defense Forces launching a raid on a Hamas terrorist center located in the largest hospital in Gaza. The raid comes as the United States confirms Hamas has been using hospitals for its terrorist activities. Supporting Israel, nearly 300,000 people traveled to our nation's capital to show support for the Jewish state and to stand against anti-Semitism. We've got that at the March for Israel. Iran, which is behind the terrorist groups attacking Israel, is also a danger here in the Western Hemisphere. We're going to bring you a look at Iran's growing power right in our own backyard. And as President Biden meets Chinese leader Xi Jinping today, a new report warns about a serious threat from China. It is growing its growing nuclear arsenal. All those stories and more ahead today, right here on CBN Newswatch.
This is CBN Newswatch.
We begin this half hour with the Israeli Defense Forces launching a key raid on a Hamas terrorist center early today, located in Gaza's largest hospital. Israel says it is taking care to protect civilians as it is delivering medical supplies and equipment to help patients in Tel Shifa Medical Center, as the Israeli Defense Forces push ahead on their mission to completely defeat Hamas. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us the story now. She's in Jerusalem.
Smoke was rising over the Gaza Strip today as fighting continued in the central part of Gaza, and the Israel Defense Forces announced they were inside the Shifa hospital.
Based on intelligence information and an operational necessity, IDF forces are carrying out a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in a specified area in the Shifa hospital.
It's an incredibly complicated situation. We know that the IDF was in Irani around 2 a.m. this morning, Israel time. We know that they're still there. The early impression that I and some others were given was that this was not necessarily going to be the final operation in Shifa, but maybe sort of an initial operation, but all of that could be developing also because they're still there after more than 10 hours.
The IDF says its battle is with Hamas and not the Palestinian people, and it's trying to avoid civilian casualties.
The IDF forces include medical teams and Arabic speakers who have undergone specified training to prepare for this complex and sensitive environment, with the intent that no harm is caused to the civilians being used by Hamas as human shields.
The IDF released footage of their delivery of medical supplies and equipment to the front of Shifa Hospital today. Gaza hospitals, including Shifa, have been an Israeli target because Israel says Hamas uses the hospitals for its military purposes, including command centers and weapons storage under the hospital buildings. The IDF says it's working to save the civilian staff and patients.
We are operating to enable evacuation of hospitals in the Gaza Strip, those that are in the north, including Shifa Hospital, to hospitals in the safer south. Today, the Al-Quds Hospital evacuation was completed. We have offered the Shifa Hospital Administration, alongside international NGOs, to transfer incubators, medical equipment, and food to the Premature Babies Department of the hospital. The equipment is ready to be transferred.
The IDF also released more footage of weapons found earlier under the Rantisi Hospital. And after Israel said Hamas had terror centers under Gaza hospitals, the U.S. backed up those claims.
I can confirm for you that we have information that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad use some hospitals in the Gaza Strip, including Al-Shifa, and tunnels underneath them to conceal and to support their military operations and to hold hostages.
And in Washington, more than 100 congressmen watched the October 7th massacre video released privately by the Israeli government, collected from body cam and cell phone footage of the terrorists themselves. Many reportedly left the room shaken and at a loss for words, with some in tears. Representative Steve Cohen says the U.S. needs to act now to send weapons and never forget.
I just watched the 1-minute film provided by the Israeli government for our members to watch, the 47-minute film of the horrors of Hamas and what they did on October the 7th. Everyone who saw that should never forget it and should give notice to the world of the barbarity and the horrific attack on the Israeli people.
They wanted members to see this, to never forget, to remember what happened on October 7th, as we see the narrative shifting that somehow the Palestinians are the victims. Well, I can assure you, everybody who saw that video today knows who the real victims are. The victims were the Jewish people.
And to prevent any more attacks like those on October 7th, the Israeli military is pushing ahead in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel's goal is complete victory over Hamas or anything like it in the future. But at the same time, as there are heavy exchanges of fire with Hezbollah in northern Israel, he warned them against pushing the state of Israel.
We are committed to restoring security to the citizens of Israel, both in the south and in the north, and that's what we're going to do.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
We continue our coverage now with Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. He's joining us from Jerusalem. So, Chris, let's begin with the Israeli raid on the Shifa hospital. How dangerous of an action was this for the Israeli military?
Well, Ephraim, tremendously dangerous. I talked to a military correspondent there on our story, Yonan Bobby, said this could be the biggest development since the start of the war. Incredibly complicated. And why? Because the epicenter of all the Hamas's military operation all the way back to 2014 has been under these large hospitals, El Shifa being the largest hospital in Gaza. They use it to hide underground. We also know that maybe some of the hostages would have been there. It's incredibly complicated military operation because, one, you want to eliminate Hamas, but on the same time, you need to protect the patients, the staff, while the whole world is watching and while the international media is covering this. Hamas has known for years that Israel wouldn't come from the air, and even for special forces, it's a daunting task, and it's a developing situation. As we understand it, began 2 a.m. local time here in Israel. But overall, I think there is proof, that not only today, but throughout the last few days, that Hamas has systematically been using these hospitals for their military operations.
Chris, Israel's military says it's making great progress in its military action in Gaza. Qualify that for us. Is Hamas on the run from Israeli forces now?
Very much in northern Gaza, Ephraim. They've made major gains, and the hospitals actually have been key to their strategy because that's been the epicenter of Hamas's military strategy. Those were their command and control centers where their leaders have been hiding out. But Hamas is no longer in control of northern Gaza, and that's a major victory for the IDF, and they continue to eliminate and degrade the ability of Hamas to wage war. We know the number of rockets has been limited substantially. They're out apparently of their longer-range missiles. They're even shooting some of their shorter-range missiles, but major gains have been made by the IDF, particularly in northern Gaza.
Let's turn to the hostage situation now. We're hearing talks of a deal. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, President Biden at the end of a news conference the other day said, hang in there, we're coming. That gave some hope to some of the families of the hostages that perhaps there could be some sort of a deal or rescue. Following that, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the information about the hostages will be made public, quote unquote, if and when there are concrete developments. So he tempered a little bit what President Biden had said. There are several reports that the head of Shin Bet, which is Israel's equivalent of the FBI, has gone to Cairo to discuss a deal to free some of the hostages. ABC News is also reporting a breakthrough could come in the next 2 or 3 days. But, there have been talks of breakthroughs in the past few weeks, and so nothing has developed yet. We know that Hamas holds about 180 hostages, Palestinian Islamic Jihad about 40, and then there's families that hold about 20. So that makes it incredibly complex negotiations to try to get any of these hostages out. And that's why a number of groups around the world have been mobilizing prayer for the release of the hostages.
Chris, we're hearing word that the Biden administration has extended a waiver on some sanctions on Iran that will give Iran access to roughly $10 billion. What kind of response are you hearing about that?
Well, a lot of people are very upset about that. Specifically, what it does is it allows Iraq to purchase electricity from Iran. That's going to free up about $10 billion for Iran. And supposedly they're going to use it for humanitarian purposes, not for nefarious purposes. Now, a lot of people here in the region, and I think on Capitol Hill as well, don't believe that. It's going to allow Iran to transfer money to its proxies in the region. And the current war it's waging, that Iran is waging against Israel in its so-called ring of fire with all these proxy groups around the region.
We began this newscast with a report from Julie Stahl, once again hearing warnings about the growing fighting with Hezbollah in northern Israel. How seriously is the Israeli government taking the threat from Hezbollah there?
Very seriously. You saw that at the end of our report, Netanyahu met with leaders of the northern communities yesterday. He said they're striking Hezbollah hard. It's been the worst fighting since 2006. And it continues to escalate. It's, as we reported a few days ago, one expert said it's a war, no longer just a conflict, maybe low level, but it's a war. We have 60,000 people displaced up on the north. That's not sustainable in the long run. And what's next in the north is still the big question.
All right, Chris, thank you. Our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joining us from Jerusalem. We thank you for your coverage. And as always, we continue to pray for you and our entire team there in Israel. Here at home, an historic rally in our nation's capital Tuesday called the March for Israel, as nearly 300,000 people of different faiths and political beliefs came together to support the Jewish state in its war against terrorism and to take a stand against anti-Semitism. The rally came in response to weeks of pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests in the United States and around the world. CBN's Hillary Powell brings us this story now from Washington.
With a message in song to stamp out hate, organizers say an estimated 290,000 people spoke with their feet, gathering on the National Mall to stand with Israel, condemn anti-Semitism, and call for the safe return of the remaining nearly 240 hostages abducted by Hamas on October 7th. Family members fought back tears to tell their story.
My family is being held hostage by terrorists. I am here with you because I love my family, and I promised I would scream to the ends of the earth for them.
The March for Israel saw bipartisan endorsement of one of America's closest allies as criticism has intensified over Israel's offensive in Gaza, set off by the Hamas incursion. Overlooking a mass of Israeli and U.S. flags, top congressional leaders, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, joined hands with Republicans House Speaker Mike Johnson and Iowa Senator Joni Ernst.
There are few issues in Washington that could so easily bring together leaders of both parties in both chambers, but the survival of the state of Israel and her people unites us together.
Congress will continue to support in a bipartisan way the state of Israel and Israel's unequivocal right to exist.
Crowd members draped in the Israeli flag stood side by side with Christians as well.
Gathered before me on this mall are people of all faiths, beliefs, identities, and backgrounds. You are united by your abhorrence of Jew hatred and your recognition of its lethal nature.
I am here to deliver a singular message. Israel, you are not alone.
Students from across the country showed up in strong numbers, including young voices, saying they are concerned for others.
Because we need to stand with our country in the times of need they're in.
One student group came from Miami to show support for Israel. High school senior Shoshana Wagoda says it has real personal impact as she prepares to head to college.
We're Jewish and we love Israel and it's our home. And that's the only place that we can feel really safe with all the anti-Semitism in the world.
We oppose the state of Israel because we are Jews.
A contingent of Jewish counter-protesters peacefully spoke out against Israel and Zionism. One father brought his family to the march and says it's sobering for his children to be called to action so young.
Yeah, we have kids who are in Jewish day school, and they're surrounded by people who are in mourning right now. And it's sad that they have to learn it at this age, but this is the world we live in, unfortunately.
Peace has been the cornerstone of this event for the organizers, and D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser says the presence of the National Guard has further helped to ensure that. In Washington, Hillary Powell, CBN News.
Coming up, the war against Israel extends far beyond the Middle East. The long arm of Iran reaches all the way into our own hemisphere in South America. We're going to bring you a look at how Jewish communities are being targeted and possible threats here in the United States. We've got the story for you when we come back. Iran and the militias it supports, like Hezbollah, are dangerous in other regions of the world beyond the Middle East. Hezbollah terrorists are plotting attacks against Jewish communities in South America. Iran is also undercutting diplomatic support for the Jewish state in the region. 4 nations have removed or recalled their ambassadors to Israel. Dale Hurd brings us this look at Iran's growing dominance right in our own backyard.
Brazilian police foiled a terror attack last week against Jewish targets after a tip from Israel's spy agency Mossad. 2 members of Hezbollah were arrested. This in a region that saw horrific bombings in 1992 and 1994, both the work of Hezbollah and Iran. During a time of war in the Middle East, the growing influence of Iran and Hezbollah in Latin America creates not only a renewed strategic threat to the United States, but a fresh danger to Latin America's Jewish community. Dr. Evan Ellis is a Latin American specialist at the U.S. Army War College.
If what is happening in the Middle East right now, heats up into a hot war between the United States and Iran, one can expect that Iran will seek to mobilize its proxy networks, Hezbollah and others throughout the hemisphere. And so it's not unthinkable, numerous attacks that could be undertaken against both Israeli and Jewish community targets and U.S. targets.
Iran's influence can be seen behind the decisions of 4 Latin American nations to remove or recall their ambassadors from Israel after it attacked Hamas in Gaza. Chile, Bolivia, Honduras, and Colombia. The Bolivian government said it will cut diplomatic ties with Israel. Iran has been forging military and business alliances with dictators and corrupt leaders in Latin America for decades, most famously with Venezuela, which is helping Iran build drones and hosting camps for Hezbollah fighters and members of Iran's Quds force. Latin Americans are also getting a steady diet of anti-U.S. programming through Iran's Hispan TV, which blankets the region. Earlier this year, Brazil's socialist government ignored U.S. protests and allowed Iran to dock 2 warships in Rio de Janeiro. In Buenos Aires, Dr. Ariel Gelblung with the Simon Wiesenthal Center says the fact that Iranian and Hezbollah agents are operating freely in Latin America has Jews in the region on alert.
We are all worried here in Argentina and in all Latin America about this. If they can't attack in southern Lebanon to Israel, they will try in another place. Their worries, of course, to protect the Jewish community in this country.
Latin America has become a win-win situation for Iran as it builds profitable alliances for itself while helping strengthen governments that are hostile to the United States and to Israel. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Still ahead, it is a major threat to the United States, and it's growing quickly. China's rapidly expanding nuclear arsenal. We're going to have that story for you. It's coming up right after this. As President Biden prepares to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping today in San Francisco, a new Pentagon report reveals a disturbing development about China's military power. Aside from expanding land, air, and sea capabilities, Beijing's nuclear arsenal is rapidly growing, blowing past previous projections. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke is on this story.
According to this intelligence, China has more than 500 nuclear warheads in its arsenal as of May. That's 100 more than last year and puts Beijing on pace to field more than 1,000 by 2030. A rapid expansion that has the U.S. taking note.
They're becoming a great power. They don't want to be checkmated by our nuclear forces, and they want to therefore be in our league.
Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institution says China still has a ways to go before its stockpile rivals that of the U.S. or Russia. He adds, while the buildup isn't a surprise, he does find the budding partnership between Beijing and Moscow concerning.
We always had a framework, and we assumed that it was okay for Russia and the United States to each have equal numbers of different types of weapons. And now you have a problem, because if China comes into the equation, and China and Russia are strategic partners, and we let each of the 3 have the same number of weapons, now it could sort of feel like a 2-to-1, the United States getting outmuscled or outgunned.
O'Hanlon says China's military rise will likely require new arms treaties or at least greater transparency. Meanwhile, the Pentagon report also shows a sharp increase in risky behavior by the PRC in the air.
In the last 2 years, we've had as many incidents with the Chinese in the South China Sea and environment as in the previous decade.
Between the fall of 2021 and fall of 2023, the DoD documented more than 180 instances of dangerous air intercepts against U.S. aircraft. One of the most recent happening at the end of October when a Chinese fighter flew recklessly close to a U.S. bomber.
And the bottom line is that, in many cases, this type of operational behavior can cause accidents, and dangerous accidents can lead to inadvertent conflict.
This news comes as President Biden prepares to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in California. The two are expected to announce the resumption of military communication channels, a move seen as an attempt to stabilize the relationship between the world's two largest powers and lower the risk of a military misunderstanding. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, amid all the turmoil in the world, we've got an encouraging word for your day ahead. We've got that for you when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching CBN Newswatch.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel Live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
Time now for your Wednesday word, and today I'd like to share two words separated by only one letter: think and thank. And I encourage you to do both. Think on your circumstances, then thank God for the ability to overcome. Think on your trouble, but quickly turn to thank God. He is in control. Think, but more importantly, thank Him in all things. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. I want to remind you, you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can also find them online at cbnnews.com. They're there in both places at any time. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do so by emailing us, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make it a wonderful Wednesday. We'll see you tomorrow.
This is CBN Newswatch.
Thank you so much for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. I want to begin this half hour with the war in Israel. Israel finding a growing amount of evidence, Hamas's terror operations around the Shifa hospital in Gaza. And the Israeli military has recovered the bodies of 2 hostages. Israel's military is gearing up to going even deeper into Gaza to finally defeat Hamas. But there's a disagreement between the Israeli government and the Biden administration about what will happen after the war. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has this story now. She joins us from Jerusalem.
U.S. intelligence shows Hamas was using the medical facility to protect a key command center. Hamas denies Israel's claims, but the Israeli military also says it found photos and videos of hostages on laptop computers in the Shifa hospital. They also discovered a booby-trapped vehicle containing a large amount of weapons.
We found a vehicle filled with ammunition, RPGs, AK-47s. We see handcuffs, knives, preparation for taking hostages from Israel on the attack of October 7th. As you can see, they were very well prepared, and where they're hiding all of this equipment is in a hospital, a place that's supposed to be for humanitarian aid. They have all this evil hidden here.
The State Department says it's because of Hamas' strategy that it's difficult for Israel to avoid civilian casualties.
Remember that it is Hamas that is putting all of these people in harm's way. It is Hamas that continues to operate inside hospitals as they have done inside mosques and schools and other civilian infrastructure. It is the Hamas that is the root of all this problem. That is creating such a difficult challenge for the international community and for the Israeli military.
In an interview with CBS News, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says they have concrete evidence that terror chieftains were hiding in the hospital and fled when Israeli troops entered. He also said they believe the hostages were there.
We had strong indications that they were held in the Shifa hospital, which is one of the reasons we entered the hospital. If they were taken out. We have intelligence about the hostages. But again, as to your first question, I think the less I say about it, the better.
The Israeli military saying it recovered the bodies of 2 hostages near the Shifa hospital. 65-year-old Yehudit Weiss, a mother of 5 whose husband was killed on October 7th, and IDF soldier Noah Marciano, also abducted on October 7th and murdered inside Gaza. President Biden is backing Israel's military operation, but also saying he discussed with Israelis their need to be incredibly careful in the Shifa hospital raid, and saying the fighting in Gaza would go on until Hamas was defeated.
With regard to when is this going to stop, I think it's going to stop when Hamas no longer maintains the capacity to murder and abuse and just do horrific things to the Israelis.
But there is a clear disagreement between the U.S. and Israel. Netanyahu says Israel will maintain security control over Gaza after the war is over to protect Israel. But Biden sees a different future, again supporting a Palestinian state, an idea not likely to be popular here in Israel.
I made it clear to the Israelis that to Bibi and to his war cabinet that I think the only ultimate answer here is a 2-state solution that's real.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell is joining us now from Jerusalem. So, Chris, with the recent tragedies and the hostages, is Israel considering a deal that can release the remaining?
Well, a few minutes ago, I might have said not seriously, but there was just a New York Times report that came out that this deal may happen, actually. The proposal is this, that Hamas would release about 50 hostages for a ceasefire, probably about 3 days, and the release of some female Palestinian prisoners in exchange for some of these female hostages. We'll see if that's going to develop. That's been on the table for the last several days. Benjamin Netanyahu has said for a long time that there'll be no ceasefire without a release of all the hostages. And he also said, as he said in that CBS report, that the raid on the Shifa hospital was because they suspected that hostages were there and have evidence to that right now. So we'll see what happens. They believe the ground campaign, it really has put more pressure for the release of the hostages, something that people here in Israel and around the world have been advocating for, putting diplomatic pressure and certainly praying for their release.
Chris, we're hearing of disagreement between President Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu on what will happen to Gaza once the war ends. Can you give us some more insight into what those differences are?
Yeah, first of all, Netanyahu wants 3 things, and so does Israel. They want, number 1, that Gaza will be demilitarized. Second, that Gaza will be de-radicalized. And the third thing is they want Israel to have overall military responsibility, not necessarily to reoccupy the Gaza Strip, but they want to make sure that there's no repeat of what's happened in the past 16 years since 2007 when Hamas took over. So as we said, as Julie said in that report, the Biden administration is promoting the idea of a 2-state solution, that the Palestinian Authority will take over the Gaza Strip. To most Israelis, that's really a non-starter. The Palestinian Authority itself is involved in terror, and they still have in place the policy of what's called pay to slay, where they actually reward terrorists and their families. So it's unlikely, in my mind anyway, that Israel would ever accept the Palestinian Authority to take over the Gaza Strip.
The Israeli military found a tunnel on the Al-Shifa hospital grounds and weapons in a vehicle. What are some other things found that would show indication of Hamas using the hospital as a command center, if you will?
Well, they also found bombs, they found weapons, and they're finding terror tunnels in the hospital compound. Remember, they're taking this systematically, almost step by step, so they can discover while protecting the soldiers. Remember, many of these tunnels will likely have been booby-trapped, so that's what they're going systematically through the whole compound. And it's reported that, not only the staff of the Shifa hospital, but along with Hamas, really had time to conceal more of the evidence that the hospital was used as a terror base, and likely that many of the leaders fled before Israel was able to take over the hospital. And so they're systematically going through, trying to neutralize the hospital as a Hamas command center.
Just a few seconds left, but let us know what's coming up this evening on Jerusalem Dateline.
Well, an update on the situation. We also have a story on that historic rally in Washington, D.C. earlier this week. Also a story on cowboys on the kibbutz. Some cowboys have come over to help some of the farmers over here. There's also a story about some Israelis are actually helping each other, part of the people that have been taken out of their kibbutzes. And also a CBN Israel story about how CBN Israel has been helping Israelis on the northern border with much-needed medical equipment. That'll all be on this week's today's Jerusalem Dateline, Ephraim.
All right, thanks a lot. Chris Mitchell reporting for us from Jerusalem. You can catch more from him and the entire team on Jerusalem Dateline tonight. Coming up, see how some Israelis are helping each other in big ways during the war. Stay with us. You're watching CBN Newswatch. Welcome back to CBN Newswatch. While many Israelis believe October 7th is the worst event in Jewish history since the Holocaust, they also feel the tragedy is bringing out the best in their people. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl joins us again and shows us how they are stepping up to help those in need.
When Hamas attacked communities along the Gaza border October 7th, people escaped with almost no belongings. It didn't take long for Israelis from around the country to jump in and help.
The people of Israel now is in its best, and everybody takes part for effort to take care for us. The government, it's taken a lot of time for the government to act, but earlier the people is acting.
Nearly 1,000 residents of Be'eri community are staying at the David Hotel on the Dead Sea. This includes children who need activities and school. Inbal Bachar normally oversees preschool children up to age 3 in the Eshkol region. That includes her own kibbutz Be'eri, one of the hardest hit communities.
When we came to here, to Dead Sea, in the beginning, I thought that I have enough energy, to build all the kindergartens and all this. But very quick, I understood it. I'm not there. I'm not good for this project.
Then Israelis and organizations like Dror Israel and IsraAid joined in the effort.
They built us kindergartens from birth to 6 years old. And it took me something like 2.5 weeks to recover and to be able to wake up in the morning to do something, to want to awake in the morning.
Kindergarten teacher Ella Yalon left her home in central Israel to help.
We felt that with all the horrible things that happened to us here in Israel, I think most of the people in Israel wanted to do something. And when we saw this invitation, we understood as education people that this is the place we need to be right now.
One priority is getting children back to a regular routine.
We try to build a schedule that they know they come here in the morning, they go in the noontime. In the meanwhile, every day we do a circle that we sing, move a little bit, read stories.
They've also started a garden.
It's activity that bring the hope and thinking positively about the future, that something will grow.
Since 2001, IsraAid has responded to more than 100 disasters worldwide, and this is the first time they are working in their home country.
We are now working in over a dozen locations across Israel with displaced communities from the Gaza border region.
Shahar May says it became clear the first day they would need to launch an operation.
We run a child and parent space where children can engage in play under the supervision of trained mental health professionals. And we also handle the logistical support for the donation store. Many people left their homes with absolutely nothing, just the clothes on their back.
May says even though the Be'eri residents have suffered huge trauma and loss, they are pulling together.
Everything we do is in full partnership with the kibbutz itself, but the community itself, watching them come together and the resilience that is here in that community and all of the communities that we work with is incredible.
Dr. Alon Pauker, a Be'eri resident, says this sense also gives them the strength and will to rebuild, even if it takes 2 or 3 years to come up with a solution.
When you come as a community, you can rebuild the community.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, the Dead Sea, Israel.
A show of solidarity. An Iraqi Muslim traveled from Minnesota to the Jewish state to contribute to Israel's war effort. See how others from around the world are coming to aid the Israelis when we come back. The 2024 elections are less than a year away. Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar, an outspoken critic of Israel and U.S. support for the Jewish state, is facing a challenge. Her opponent is an Iraqi-born Muslim woman who recently visited Israel to show her support and see how the world is responding to help. CBN's John Wagi reports now from Jerusalem.
Congressional candidate Dalia Al-Akidi traveled from Minnesota to see the situation for herself and contribute to Israel's war effort.
I decided to come to Israel to show solidarity with the Israelis, to show solidarity with the Jewish people, and to give a message that you are not alone. You are suffering from the exact same illness and hatred that we Muslims have been suffering for ages from radical Islamism and from terrorism.
Deputy Mayor Fleur Hassan Nahum invited Al-Akidi to visit a repurposed theater manned by hundreds of volunteers, helping an estimated 30,000 plus evacuees receive basic necessities.
This is where we have almost 20 departments of different types of help for the evacuees mainly, but also for families whose husbands or sons have gone to the front lines, psychosocial trauma care. Behind me there is a shop with clothes and books and toys for evacuees to take anything they need so they don't lack of anything. Just thousands of volunteers poured in to help.
Baghdad-born Al-Akidi, a former journalist, joined volunteers handing out donated items to evacuees now housed in Jerusalem.
I covered Iraq when ISIS entered the city of Mosul. I've seen the atrocities of ISIS, and I've seen the atrocities of Al-Qaeda. ISIS and Al-Qaeda combined doesn't even go to what Hamas did since October 7th. So when we hear resistance, no, these are pure terrorists. Good people around the world should fight. My heart aches when I see on TV the children, the Palestinian children. It breaks my heart, but guess what? They're not the victims of Israel. They are the victims of Hamas. They are the victims of the Islamic Jihad.
Hassan Nahum tells CBN News international media coverage can be fickle concerning the only democracy in the Middle East.
From the mainstream media, we'd have about 4 or 5 days of sympathy after they turn on Israel and attack our right to defend ourselves. I think we're the only country in the world that has to defend the right to defend ourselves.
Anybody has the right to defend itself. If I am a mother and my daughter and parade her in the street, I would eat these people. These Hamas terrorists have no morals, and we have to stand on the right side of history.
Al-Akidi is in a fierce political race to unseat Representative Ilhan Omar in Minnesota's 5th House District.
I came from Minnesota. Basically, it's ground zero for anti-Semitism. I came to give a message to the Israelis, to the Jewish people, that yes, you hear Ilhan Omar, but Ilhan Omar speaks for herself. Ilhan Omar does not speak for her constituents. Ilhan Omar does not speak for the good people of Minnesota who are watching the news, who are seeing what's happening.
Al-Akidi describes her very personal stand against radical Islam.
When ISIS entered the city of Mosul in 2014 and the terrorists persecuted all the Christians there, I went on air and I said, I am the Muslim Sunni. I'm against that. I'm going to wear the cross. And yesterday, I took this, the Star of David, and I'm putting it here until we all reach peace.
Hassan Nahum says the war has helped to unify Israeli politicians and expresses her gratitude to Christians supporting Israel.
The response and the organization and the collaboration between people who are political opponents has been truly, truly heartwarming. From the horror of what we've experienced, I want to thank all the support that we're getting from the Christian community from all around the world. We know who our friends are, and we thank you. We feel your embrace.
John Waggy, CBN News, Jerusalem.
The miraculous rescue of dozens who were stuck in Israel when the war began. We've got the story when we come back.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel Live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
And welcome back to CBN Newswatch. We're back with a story of hope. A Georgia pastor who was in Israel when the war broke out is thanking God for what he calls his miraculous rescue, along with 30 others who were stranded in Nazareth. Our Wendy Griffith has this story.
Pastor Todd Cox of Stone Point Church in Cumming, Georgia, had been in Israel for 7 days. During that time, he baptized 16 people in the Jordan River and also renewed his vows with his wife at Magdala. All happened according to plan until Saturday morning, October 7th.
That's when we got the information that the war had broken out, that about 4,000 rockets had been fired in the south.
What was your first instinct?
Previous to the ministry, I was in the Coast Guard, and so I'm a rescuer at heart, and I'm a leader and a take charge guy. It certainly made me want to do something and to jump into action, but the good news is the Lord really just gave me a sense of peace and calm.
Although up north in Nazareth, a safer part of Israel, they realized that could change.
We contacted, of course, the embassy. We filled out paperwork with the State Department to let them know where we were so they could get in touch with us if there was an emergency. And there was some options to fly out of Tel Aviv into Istanbul, and then that went away. And of course, people were a little worried about going down to Tel Aviv when rockets are going that way.
Cox had been posting about their situation, and the first miracle happened when a friend saw the post and connected them with Representative Corey Mills of Florida.
The next day, he flew out to Jordan, personally flew out to Jordan, came across the border, made his contacts, and met us in Nazareth and got on the bus with us in Nazareth and escorted us all the way across the border, personally took care of us, and got us into a hotel in Amman, Jordan, where we were able to fly out the following day. And I just truly believe that God used her and Representative Mills as his instruments to rescue us.
Judy Paxton, Pastor Todd's mother, also on the trip, agrees.
Absolutely. He's my hero. He came in with a plan. He made us all feel at ease. Somebody had sent me a passage, and it said, he will send his angels to rescue you. And so I showed him that verse, and I said, you're the angel that God sent to rescue us.
News of the rescue quickly spread.
I hope that, them being home now, or them actually getting out and to be in a safe space, has given them confidence that Americans won't be left behind.
The lesson in all of this for Pastor Todd: stay close to Jesus.
But if we're not close and we're not listening and we're not tuned into his voice, then we're going to miss it. And so I just want to encourage people to be close to him, to be in his word, to be listening to his still small voice.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
And it is now time for your Friday Faithful. And today I want to leave you with this word. God is God, and you are his child. You're his son. You are his daughter. You are his creation, his masterpiece. Don't underestimate his power. He is God. You're his child. Today is a great day to stop playing small. Walk, talk, and live like you are a child of the Most High God, because indeed you are. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. I want to remind you, you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time as well as online. That address is cbnnews.com. Take a moment, let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make it a fabulous Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, and come right back here come Monday. Goodbye. God bless.
This is Chris Mitchell with CBN News, along with Paul Strand of CBN News. And this is our update, Israel War Day 44. Typically, we've been doing things from our studio and sending stories or interviews. But we thought today we would talk about the war.
Yeah.
Day 44. It's hard to believe, Paul.
I know. It's a horrible thing, but it seems like the soldiers are doing well. I saw the death rate for the soldiers is under 60 so far, and I got to say it's amazing this many weeks of war that one side would only have less than 60 people killed. Every death is a tragedy, but that's amazing in the history of warfare.
Yeah.
You know, at D-Day there were thousands and thousands of U.S. soldiers killed. And I must say, for the other side, it appears like thousands of Hamas terrorists are getting killed. So it's definitely the Israelis are fighting better.
It seems that way, and it's just part of the hardest fighting there is. There's urban warfare, but it makes it even that much more difficult because of the tunnels. 300 miles of tunnels that are under Gaza City and throughout many places in Gaza.
Yeah, and I mean, what's amazing is the big charge against Israel by all these demonstrators around the world is Israel is committing genocide, and yet part of the reasons these soldiers are dying is because they're trying to be so careful not to cause civilian casualties, and that comes at a price. If you can't just blanket bomb everything out of your way, then you know you're obviously going to get hit harder. But what has amazed me about this being urban warfare is that I think because the American soldiers have taught the Israelis so many lessons about what we faced in Iraq and cities like Fallujah.
Right.
I think this is one of the reasons they're not losing people. They have a smarter way to go in there and get these things. They're not getting surprised. I don't know what they're sending in, robots or whatever, but they have deep kind of probes, and I think it's preventing a lot of casualties.
Yeah.
So pretty good news so far in this war.
Well, and they learned a lot from 2014. That was the last land invasion of the Gaza Strip back then. So they learned some lessons there, and the tunnels were a big obstacle and a very dangerous thing for the soldiers then.
Yeah.
You were saying about there was a poll that you thought was very important.
Yeah, and this is done by Arabs in Ramallah, which is the Palestinian capital, and it's just got some shocking numbers. So let me read it off the phone here. Almost 98%, and these respondents, these are people who call themselves part of the Palestinian Authority. They're citizens who I guess would maybe vote for the PA or something like that, or they live underneath their control. But 98% of them say the slaughter that happened on October 7th made them feel prouder of their identity as Palestinians. And 59.3% of these Arabs say they extremely supported the attacks on October 7th. So that's about 60%, 15.7% more say they somewhat supported it. So that's like, over 75% of these people back this slaughter that these Hamas terrorists committed. And I think that shows us a lot, because the Biden administration is saying to Israel, well, once you're done in Gaza, you basically have to turn this over to the Palestinian Authority. They're the only, and they'll govern it right. And yet, here's the citizens that live under them, and they support this kind of stuff that much, and it makes them prouder to be Palestinians. So I don't see how the Palestinian Authority is any kind of solution for once Israel's wiped out the Hamas.
Yeah, we've been doing stories for years, and by the way, if you have any questions, let us know. And let's see, just looking at the comments here. And so, Paul, I was gonna say that just a few minutes ago I was watching a video from a Gaza youth camp where they're training these kids, giving them weapons to hold, showing them anti-tank missiles, going through the tunnels with them. And if you realize that this is what the kids are being indoctrinated with and trained, then you realize when they grow up, this is how they emulate some of the people that have been killed. They're as martyrs or shihads, and so this is something that they aspire to, many of these kids. Now, I remember in 2005, that's when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip, and they literally gave it back to the Palestinian Authority at the time. That was overthrown by Hamas in 2007. So for the past 17 years or so, even 16 years, then they have been raising a generation.
Yeah.
And if you look some of the unedited raw footage that some of the journalists was able to watch, these Hamas terrorists are in their young 20s.
Yeah.
And you realize that these are the kids probably back in 2007 that were indoctrinated and go to summer camps. And so they emulate what these inspiring martyrs, and that's what they did.
Well, and tell me if this is true, because I've only been here about a year. I understand the teaching materials in these schools in the Gaza Strip. These are Palestinian Authority materials that teach these kids to hate Jews and to want to kill them and all that. The supposed, free Palestine basically means wipe out the Jews and get Israel out of the way. And so if that's true, you're asking the Palestinian Authority to take over Gaza Strip, and they're the ones who basically teach the kids these horrible things. So I think this is one of the biggest problems, is once they wipe out Hamas, if they can, what do you do with all the civilians who support them? And what do you do with all those kids? How do you, I guess you'd call it kind of denazification, but that seems like a gigantic work of many years to me.
Well, yeah, it's going to be a heavy lift, as you would say. And if the... for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is a religious indoctrination. This is what they aspire to. It's how they teach. So it's you would have to train the whole generation of kids, because they're brought up this way.
Yeah. I'm wondering, how do you feel about this viewpoint? I heard this from some commentator, that he was saying, isn't Israel, by doing this, just going to create even more radicals? People who will even more fiercely say, we've got to wipe out these Israelis. Look what they just did to us. Yeah. What do you think of that viewpoint?
Well, to a certain extent, I think that is true. People they get bitter about what happened, maybe to their father or their uncle. But I think it goes deeper than that. I think this is what many are taught in the mosques, in their schools. Some of the teaching is from the Palestinian Authority, and we've done stories for years about how the Palestinian Authority has, educated a generation or generations of Palestinians that they want to have the Jews wiped out. They want to take over Israel and make it all Palestine. So it goes back generations.
Yeah, and this just makes me think that all this talk, like the Biden administration says, the only solution after all this is a two-state solution. And I just can't see Israelis, after the blow of October 7th, saying, well, sure, let's give all of Judea and Samaria, all the West Bank, to the Palestinian Authority for good, make it a real nation, united with the Gaza Strip. How could Israelis expect any sort of thing like that with these kind of numbers, that something like 75% of Palestinians support this kind of Hamas terrorism? Where does that just go? Just because you give them the land, why would they stop attacking? And if they've got the whole West Bank, which just covers like the whole side of Israel, it would seem like impossible for Israel to ever have security again.
It's going to be very difficult, and I know it's the Biden administration that is pushing this. Apparently they want some sort of an international community to get together to have governance over Gaza Strip for a season or temporarily, and then allow the Palestinian Authority to come in. Last night at the press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he said that's not going to happen because of Mahmoud Abbas has never condemned what happened on October 7th. Some of the ministers in the PA have actually praised it. So this is not the kind of government or authority that Israel wants in Gaza.
Yeah. Do you think the world, can Israel actually survive condemnation from all over the world and just go ahead and do what probably needs to be done here, which is to just say, Israel is Israel, it's God's country, it's our country, and that's just the way it's going to be. We cannot have these people right next to us ready to kill us at all times. I mean, do you think Israel could do that and get away with it in the eyes of the world?
Well, there's a lot of people that would want Israel to do that, but Israelis are divided on that. There is a I would say probably a sizable minority that would want Israel to declare sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. But there's a significant minority that would say, no, we don't want to do that. We want to give that back to the Palestinians. I think that viewpoint has certainly lessened over the years because of all the terror attacks that come out of the West Bank. Well,
with all the attention on Gaza Strip right now and the North, what's going on with the Hezbollah shooting at us every single day up there in the north. I don't think most of the world realizes what's going on in the West Bank and Judea, Samaria, that there's fighting going on every day right there, right next to us. I mean, we're right now about, what, half a mile from the West Bank, standing where we are, and there's fighting going on. There's fighting in Bethlehem today, about 2 miles from here, and 5 miles maybe. But, I mean, the idea is these people they're already there and they're armed, and the reason that Mahmoud Abbas does not ever hold an election is because he knows Hamas would take over Judea and Samaria. And so it seems to me Israel just, how could they abide this? And for people to think that what's going on in the West Bank and Samaria, well, great, let them govern the Gaza Strip because they're doing so great, they're so peaceful. It's just not true, is it? I mean, there's attacks, fighting going on every day. They caught some guys at one of the border crossings into Jerusalem, right? They jumped out of their car, they started shooting. 6 soldiers got shot, I think, if I recall that right, that attack. And these guys, their car was just filled with ammunition, cartridges, automatic weapons, ready to come into Jerusalem and commit a massacre. So it seems to me untenable. I can't see how you just say, well, we'll just live with these people. It'll be fine.
I don't know what Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, is thinking of President Biden, why they would think that the Palestinian Authority would be a peace partner. They keep talking about a two-state solution. They've been talking about that for more than 20 years. And, David Friedman, he's the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, he said in the State Department, the definition of insanity is doing something over and over and expecting different results. He said in the State Department they call that diplomacy. So this two-state solution keeps coming up, and much of the world advocates it, but it really hasn't worked for more than 20 years.
I heard somebody so liberal as this, Hillary Clinton, just the other day saying, back when her husband was president, said, we were offering the Palestinians a state. We had it all worked out. And they said no, and they've said no again and again and again. They aren't even looking for a two-state solution, which is, I think,
we got to get back.
Something we just don't know about. We're being given a little direction here.
Yeah, we are.
Back a little bit
see if there's any comments or questions.
We can see your comments, or at least Chris can. My eyesight's not that good. It's little tiny letters. But,
well, one other thing, Paul, is the fact that not only are they fighting down in Gaza and the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, but up in the north, and if that actually, it's a low-scale war right now, but if Iran directs Hezbollah to make it a full-scale war, things are going to change dramatically here. 150,000 missiles, many of them precision guided, meaning they can aim it at a building and hit that building. And so I look like that building right behind us. That could be a target. They could program the missile to hit it, and it could hit it. So that's kind of scary. In fact, I have wondered, once Israel, if they do what they plan to do, get it done in Gaza Strip, do you think they might turn around and go after Hezbollah just because how can you stand having 150,000 missiles aimed at you all the time for years and years? There are some that advocate that. Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren, wrote a column a couple of weeks ago, and he said, why not now? Because as serious and as tragic at what Hamas did on October 7th, Hezbollah is about 10 or 15 times more powerful than Hamas ever was. And so how can you live with the shadow of a monster like that? And that's what, right now Israelis there's maybe 60,000 Israelis that are out of those communities. They're ghost towns up there because people have, it's just too dangerous for people.
I'm not sure the rest of the world realizes what Netanyahu was just saying the other day was the fact that the number one thing is we have to make Israelis feel secure again. Like how could anybody right now feel comfortable moving back into all those kibbutzim along the border with the Gaza Strip? How can they feel comfortable going back into right underneath Lebanon? I mean, some of those villages are literally like across the street from Lebanon, right? And how can they feel secure knowing there's 150,000 missiles, all these rockets, anti-tank war weapons, and right now it appears Hezbollah is willing to use them, at least on a small scale. So it seems just untenable.
And one other subject to mention is that unprecedented anti-Semitism. I've never heard from Jewish friends to see and feel how scared they are, how unsettled they are, and it's really a time to be praying for our Jewish friends and brothers and sisters at this critical time.
I used to look at the politics of it all and say, it's not that people are anti-Semitic, it's that they're anti-Zionists. They hate the fact that Israel has taken this land from Palestine, whatever. I used to think that's the case. It's that people are they don't really have anything against Jews themselves, and especially not Jews that aren't in Israel, living on that land that used to be Palestinian land. But that's the wild thing about this, is people are attacking Jews all over the planet. People are, there's a dead man in Los Angeles killed by at a Palestinian demonstration. And these things are going on all over the world. So it does really appear to be they're after Jews, all Jews. It doesn't matter if they have anything to do with Israel or not. So this really isn't just anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. It really is anti-Semitic. And that is shocking. I mean, why? Why do people hate the Jews so much? It's just, you know what I'm saying? It feels so odd, that's like, okay, most of them look like us. We walk these streets every day. We all just, Jews look just like everybody else. So it's not like a racial thing. Do you think it's because they're known as God's chosen people?
Oh, I think definitely it's a spiritual thing. I think that's exactly what it is. I don't think it can be explained sort of logically, but I think spiritually it makes sense.
Yeah, and that is so disturbing because, you and I both have many Jewish friends, and it's mind-boggling. Why would you hate these people? They're just like you. And that's the strange thing. Like the writings of that engineering student in Cornell a few weeks ago, when he was saying these pig Jews. He kept saying that phrase over and over again. He was like trying to dehumanize them. And
well, that's exactly what Hitler did. And the Nazis, they dehumanized the Jewish people.
And I've even seen these cartoons coming back on posters and things at these demonstrations, the big hook-nosed Jew looking dark and greasy and all, and it's so frightening because it's a cartoon. This doesn't really exist. The Jews aren't any different than anyone else. But like you said, I have to think there has to be a spiritual component. And maybe it's just a jealousy that these are God's chosen people, and so other people are saying, well, I don't think they're God's chosen. I think they're less than we are.
Well, how do you think we should pray? How should people pray for these during these times?
Well, I guess, man, that is a hard thing because I guess that hearts would be changed because this is one of these things like abortion. You can't pass laws to wipe abortion out. You have to get to the hearts of women so that they wouldn't want to get abortions. And I think this may be one of these hard issues that we need to pray for people's hearts to be changed. I wish people could come to Israel and see what a wonderful country it is, how warm and friendly the people are, the wonderful things they built here, the advanced technology, and just the high level of civilization in this nation, that these people have created sort of a dreamland. It's the fourth happiest nation in the world, and I think if people could see that, and so maybe that's, people need a heart change, and that's something to pray about because it's hard to see how you could just pray this away and without people's hearts being changed.
Well, you want to pray, and you start, and I'll finish?
Sure. Dear Lord God, we thank you so much for this chance to come before you. And Lord, we thank you that right now we get to live among your chosen people. We get to know these people and see them and love them, help them. And God, I would ask that you would let them survive this war and survive it well. I would pray that the traumas caused the ungodly amount of tragedy that happened on October 7th and all the people in this country traumatized. It feels sometimes like the entire country is in trauma, and we're all going to suffer PTSD from this thing. And I would ask that you deal with that, God, that you would help us to know that we need to fight for joy, and love, and peace in our hearts. And God, I would ask that for people who hate the Jews, that you would work on their hearts, God. We know you change hearts. We know in the Bible what you did with Pharaoh's heart. You hardened his heart. But God, you can also soften hearts. And we would pray that you would get in there and fight the anti-Semitism at a heart level, because we really can't see much more of a solution than that you change the hearts of men. Thank you, Lord.
And Father, we pray, here we are, day 44. It's hard to believe. It's been 44 days since October 7th. And Lord, I do pray, like Paul, that you would comfort, as it says in Isaiah chapter 40, comfort ye my people from all the trauma, from all the mourning, from all the kidnapping and the murder. Lord, comfort. And Lord, I pray for the whole nation is really reeling in one way or the other. Everybody's been affected by either a son or a daughter in the war in whatever capacity, or affected by what happened on October 7th. So we pray, Father, for comfort, and we pray for wisdom for the leaders to make wonderful and wise decisions.
Yes.
And we just give you the praise and glory in Jesus' name.
Thank you, Lord.
Amen.
Thank you, Lord.
So thanks for joining us as it begins to rain here in Jerusalem, here on day 44. And this is our Israel at War update, along with Paul Strand.
Thank you, Chris.
Continue to watch on Facebook Live and on the 700 Club, on cbnnews.com, all of our coverage of the war and all the other news that's happening around the world. So God bless from Jerusalem. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.